Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I am starting a Buzzwordathon vlog, but this is actually me replacing a clip that had no audio, which I only discovered as I started editing the video and putting it together. So that's why you're not getting polished Steph, because I had makeup, I was looking lovely, I had all of those things done, and then I looked at the clip and the clip had no audio. And that was about a week ago that I filmed it. So I'm not very impressed with myself, but I did just want to really quickly refilm the intro because the rest of the footage is totally fine. Throughout this year, I'm going to try and film some Buzzwordathon vlogs like this, which is a slightly different format to what I have probably done when I've wrapped up the books that I've read for the Buzzwordathon challenge by Kayla from Books and La La before. So if you're unfamiliar, Kayla hosts this every year. In the past, she has traditionally had a Buzzwordathon list, which is a word or a phrase or a group of words for every month of the year where people will try and find those words in the book title. So popular words, buzzwords in bookish titles. This year she has that list of words, but she also has a second challenge which features book covers, so trends that we see on book covers. I'm planning on completing both challenges through 2025, and what I was hoping to do, and I'm experimenting a little bit with this particular vlog, is that I'm choosing my two books for both the different prompts and I'm reading them and reviewing them, but then I'm also giving you a few different recommendations, probably around 5 different recommendations for each of the prompts afterwards. So my goal is to have this vlog out fairly early within the month so that if you are participating and you don't have a book picked out yet, you might get some recommendations for it. So that's the plan. So fingers crossed. I don't know if I'll be able to do it every month, but I'm going to try because I think I like this format, and I'd be really interested in your feedback in the comments if you enjoy this kind of style of vlog. I've got my two books picked out. I'm going to start with my actual buzzword prompt, which is the word, and the words for January were truth or lies. The book cover prompt is pattern. The book that I'm going to read for truth or lies, which just simply means that you can pick any book that has truth, lies, truthful, trust, lying, liar, etc. Anything that's sort of linked to truth or lies, that word just has to feature in the title. And I have gone with True Colors by Thea, which is a novella in the Elder Races series. This is a paranormal romance series. The novella I think is 3.5, which I think I've read the first 3 full-length novels in the Elder Races. I haven't gone further than that. So this is just a good way to dip my toes back into that series and see how I still feel about it. We're going to jump into True Colors, and then I'll talk a little bit about the second book that I'm going to be reading for the pattern challenge a little bit later. So I finished reading True Colors, which is only, I think I said 99 pages, it's about 96 pages long. It is a novella set in the Elder Races universe, which looks at a lot of supernatural creatures called the Weir. And in this case, we have Alice, who is a chameleon Weir, which is a new one for me, and also Gideon, who is a police detective, and he's a wolf Weir, and he's previously been in the military and he's only kind of come into the police force fairly recently, so he's kind of adjusting. This whole story moves really quickly. Like if this had been a full-length paranormal romance novel and it was fleshed out and the characters were fleshed out, I probably would have enjoyed it a whole lot more. I still enjoyed it, but it feels like things moved very quickly because you only have 96 pages, and not only are Alice and Gideon fated mates, but they meet when the body of Alice's best friend is discovered. So it's a murder mystery kind of plot. It's a bit gruesome, so do be aware of that. There are mentions of how everyone is killed and it's a bit disturbing. And I did guess who the person responsible was fairly quickly, but I mean, it's under 100 pages, so it was just an enjoyable time. If you're a fan of the series, it's a great one to pick up. Which brings me to some recommendations for books that I've read that feature the words truth or lies or variations thereof. So I have 4 romance books or romance adjacent books, and also 1 police procedural book. So the first book I'm going to mention is A Restless Truth by Freya, who is an Australian author. A Restless Truth is book 2 in the Last Binding series, which is a historical fantasy romance series, probably. Like it kind of probably straddles that line from fantasy romance to paranormal. And this one is a sapphic story. It's the romance between Maud, who is a young woman who kind of dreams of having adventure, but she's signed on as a lady's companion aboard a traveling ship. But the old lady that she is the traveling companion for is killed. and Maud kind of gets swept up in investigating this murder alongside Violet, who is a young woman who is quite scandalous, and she is an actress, she is a magician, and Maud is kind of swept up with her, and it's their romance, but also the solving of the mystery of who is killing people within this world. My next recommendation is Lies by Kylie Scott, which is a contemporary romantic suspense story in which you have spies and secret identities and outrageous and often silly situations, but can be just a really good light-hearted read. There's also Twisted Lies by Anna Huang, and this is book 4 in the Twisted series, which admittedly I've kind of fallen off Anna Huang's writing, but that's just because she doesn't tend to write the tropes that I enjoy anymore. That said, I enjoyed it when I read it, and this one is a contemporary romance. It does have alpha heroes, and the main point of this one is a sort of fake dating situation between a very meek woman and a billionaire, and he is very aloof and sort of, what's the word? Yeah, I think we'll just go with alpha. Like, he's just very alpha. So if you enjoyed those kinds of stories, that series would work. Then there's one that I read ages ago, and it's Pack of Lies by Charlie Adhara, which is a queer paranormal romance story. It is set in North Carolina, and it is the relationship between a werewolf and a human who hunts supernatural creatures. This obviously does not make for a smooth relationship, and the werewolf happens to run a haven for pack members who have run away from their packs. So it's a really interesting story. I didn't realize there were more books in the series. So while I was going back and refreshing my memory of the plot of the book, I was like, oh, it's a series. So it might be one I have to go back and revisit. Finally, for my recommendations for this Buzzwordathon prompt, I'm going to go with Body of Lies by Sarah Bailey. This is book 4 in the Gemma Woodstock series. Now, this is not a romance. This is an Australian police procedural book, and the whole series is fantastic. And Gemma is a very, very flawed character, but this is the final book in the series, and it's a really great one because we get to see how Gemma has grown as a character and how she's trying to really put her life together again and balance motherhood and her career. She's recently got a new partner and she's had a baby daughter, but she also has her son from her previous marriage, and her previous husband was killed in a prior book, so her son is grieving. So she's dealing with a lot and managing a lot, and yet she is very much at her core someone who likes to get to the bottom of a mystery and to solve problems. So it's a really interesting balance. And while it is the final book in a series, it does read fairly well as a standalone on its own, but I do highly recommend the whole series. It's great. All right, so those are my recommendations for Truth or Lies. I will come back, probably not today. Probably going to come back to this in a couple of days and read the book for the cover challenge. So stay tuned. Hello friends, so it is a couple of days later and I am back with the next Buzzwordathon prompt. This time it's the cover prompt, which was to read a book that has a pattern on the cover. And for this I read Unlimited Futures. This is an anthology of speculative black and black fiction anthology. The editors of it are Rafif Ismail and Ellen van Nerven, and their goal with this was to bring together new voices in First Nations Black Australian voices as well as Afro-Black voices into one collection. And I was reading the start of the book. They actually have their intro is a conversation that the two editors are having around how the anthology came about, how it was put together, how they really wanted to centre Black and Black, not only authors, but also editors and publishing and whatnot in the process. And so that's what they did. They've put this all together and it's a really great collection. There's everything from near future fiction to more contemporary sci-fi ideals. There are so many really great stories in it. One of the stories, the very last one in the collection, I've got to remember when the date was, when it was originally written. So there's a story in here called The Prime Minister. And this one is by S.J. Minicon, who is a member of the Australian Indigenous community who has since passed, but he wrote this story in 1945 and it was never published. He was a writer and a poet, and his family have shared the story with the editors for inclusion in this collection. The idea to show that Black voices have and do write speculative fiction. And it's all amazing. There are some authors that I've read before. There are some short stories in the collection that I have read before in other First Nations anthologies. So that was really cool to see, you know, how they've been collected in different works and how they all fit together. So aside from the Prime Minister story, some of the others that I really enjoyed. I mean, Amberlynn Quay-Mulliner has a story in here. I've loved a lot of her work. Claire G. Coleman has a story in here. Michaela Saunders' story I had read previously in her collection. She put together her own collection of speculative fiction, which I read last year. Do I have I might have a vlog for it. If I do, I'll leave it linked somewhere. But there were, like, it was just really, really interesting and fascinating because it obviously challenges ideas of colonization, and it looks at potential futures as well. Like it's really, really fascinating. So I highly recommend this. It was really great to read, and I particularly liked the fact that not everything was just a short story, that we had poetry involved, that we did have stories in verse. So that was great. And then we come to some recommendations for other books with patterns. And interestingly enough, the majority of these are Australian First Nations, because First Nations people use a lot of pattern in their artwork. So a lot of their covers reflect that. In fact, before I move on to that, I was going to share who did the artwork here. So the cover artist is a Larrakia woman, Jenna Lee. What it says about this cover is that it looks at the interaction of separate cultures in the most respectful and wonderful way. The cover symbolizes infinity. We're not the first to have these conversations or write these stories, and we're not going to be the last. And it also says that it reflects the movements of water in the work, which is really important for Indigenous culture, and that the water allows those kinds of threads of connection and continuation to flow into each other. And Ellen Van Nerven said that the cover feels like rivers connecting and life that is created through water, but it's also water that we protect and have a relationship and responsibility to. So there's a really lovely meaning behind the artwork for the cover. So I have one contemporary romance book that has a pattern that I wasn't sure that I liked initially, but I now love, and maybe it's because I love the book. And then I'll talk about the other Indigenous titles. So there is Inner Jam by Kate Canterbury. This is a contemporary romance. It is probably one of the best, most solid contemporary romances out there. And it has this awesome repeating pattern of raspberries on the cover because our main male character has a farm, and one of the products from his farm that is produced is jam. And this is a small town, childhood friends to lovers story. And it's delightful. The male main character is a single parent. He is the guardian of his niece, and how he reconnects with our female protagonist who moves back to this town after many, many years away and is kind of surprised to see how things have changed with the neighbour next door. So highly love this. In terms of other First Nations stories, if you are looking for something that is more literary, there is The Visitors by Jane Harrison, and this looks at when the settlers arrive in Australia in 1788 on Gadigal country, and potentially how the Indigenous elders of the time considered the implications of that. So it is a really, really interesting book. The audiobook for it is fantastic. This has also, I think, been turned into a play, or it was a play and then it was turned into a novel. A very interesting book if you are at all interested in Australian history, but you would like a narrative form of it. There are two poetry collections, because I love poetry. So there is Guwayu for All Times, a collection of First Nations poems. This was commissioned by Red Room Poetry and edited by Jeanine, Leane. And it just has a really lovely, almost like I think it's a woven pattern on the cover. It's great. And then there is a collection by a single poet. This is The Body Country by Susie Anderson. I just love the circles and the colours and the fact that there is a photograph in the background in the bottom half, which you don't really notice until you look at it really deeply. And it's her capturing moments of meaning that sometimes we just miss. And it's a great collection. The next one is a non-fiction, well, it's a children's non-fiction title, and I know that I don't often now include kids non-fiction or kids books in sort of my recommendations on this channel, but I think kids non-fiction is really great and accessible for adults who are not huge non-fiction readers as well. And so for that, I have Tamara, A Story of Termites on Gurindji country. And this is an amazing pattern cover, again, by some incredible Indigenous artists here in Australia. And this one looks at the importance of termites in Australia, and in particular the termites that are native to Australia, which are not as destructive as the imported ones. The end papers are amazing, and these are the termite mounds. So it's a really, really gorgeous cover and a really great and interesting book, and not just for kids but for adults if you don't know anything about the importance of termites to First Nations culture here. Those are my recommendations, and that is the Buzzwordathon challenge for January. So I'll leave information about all the books that I have mentioned down below. If you're interested in checking them out, you absolutely can. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know, or if you have recommendations for books for any of the Buzzwordathon prompts for January, also feel free to leave those down below as well. I hope that wherever you're on the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.